I'm Sarah Wilson and you're listening to the Roots and All podcast. I'm here to help you get growing. Join me as I explore everything plant related both indoors and out and provide the information you need to create your perfect green environment. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. This week I'm speaking to Stefan Batorijs, who runs Nature and Therapy UK down in Dartmoor, which is a centre providing ecotherapy. I'm not going to say too much about him because I think he tells his story much better than I can. What I would say about this episode is if you have a chance, it might be an idea to sit down and listen to it rather than having it on in the background while you're doing other things. Because not only does Stefan have a lovely way of telling his story, he also does an exercise that he does at his centre, which you might like to take part in. Anyway, I hope you enjoy it.
I grew up in the grounds of one of Henry VIII's wives' palaces,
Wow.
which had become a Quaker hotel. My father worked in the hotel, and there weren't any other children around. So from the age of 3, I went off on my own and just wandered around the whole estate by myself. And directly behind our house, there were some beautiful sweet chestnut trees and oak trees. And then behind those were a couple of tiny little meadows that had row upon row of flowers growing in them. And I'm thinking that these were for cut flowers for each of the hotel rooms. And so very early in the morning, I would always go out into these fields and walk along the rows of flowers, which were mostly dahlias, chrysanthemums, and gladioli, which were in vogue in the 1960s. And I would look inside each flower, and it was remarkable to me that there was an earwig inside the flowers in the dew. And I can remember just having to do this as my ritual every day, was to go and see inside the flowers and see if there was an earwig inside. So I spent my childhood just roaming around this paradise, really, with bamboo forests and lakes and golf courses and lots of strange gardens, sculpture gardens, and the estate was self-sufficient. So if I was hungry, I knew how to get inside the fruit cages, and I would just gorge myself on peas. That's my first course. And then raspberries as my pudding. So the whole place belonged to me, really. Then we moved to the Lake District for about a year when I was about 6, and I continued my wanderings there, this time around the mountains. So it was a different type of flora and fauna. So I got to know rowan trees, I got to meet yew trees. I spent my time with lapwings and rooks and wrens. So different type of environment, but the same interest and sort of wanderings. And then when we moved back to Surrey, everything was beginning to get built on. Everywhere that was green and wild was allocated for housing as London expanded. And so my wild places were getting few and far between, and I was having to wander further afield. And I tended to be drawn to places that were potentially quite dangerous, like canals and weirs and disused industrial buildings and those kind of places where nature was taking over and reclaiming the land. That seemed to be where I was drawn to. And then I managed to maintain my connection to nature through my teenage years, unlike a lot of people. And I went out cycling and fishing and stuff. And then in my 30s, I trained at agricultural college as an environmental educator and countryside warden, which I really enjoyed. And I worked for the local council running a scheme to create a long distance footpath from Guildford down to Worthing on the coast. And I really enjoyed that. But I started to go off travelling. And then when I came back from travelling, I moved down to Devon, and I just loved down here, particularly seeing the buzzards. Around that time, I also started to get depressed in my sort of early 30s. And I was running an organic market garden and doing landscape gardening and tree surgery and everything. So I had quite an idyllic life. but I felt quite depressed. And I realized in retrospect that my father, who was a refugee, had really put a lot of pressure on me to have quite a conventional life. In other words, he wanted me to be an estate agent or a policeman. And I was a complete rebel, so that didn't suit me at all. I just loved being out in nature, and particularly in wild forests, but also in my garden, my vegetable garden, which I absolutely adored. So there was this kind of real pull inside me of doing what he wanted to get his approval and doing where my spirit was taking me, which was on the land. And it really affected me. I found that going out into nature was my salve, it was my balm, it was where I found my sanctuary. And this is sort of in my mid-30s, I began to think about whether everyone else felt like this, whether this affected other people. From that, I began to wonder whether other people would benefit from spending time in nature, whether it would bring them healing and bring them relief from depression or from suffering. And so I decided to retrain as a counsellor and then eventually as a psychotherapist. I also retrained as a community drama leader because I was quite shy and introvert, and I wanted to learn how to work with groups and have more confidence. And then finally, I retrained also as an outdoor activity instructor so that I would, again, have the confidence to take people out into wild places. And then I pulled all of those things together, which were like 4 petals of a flower. And in the middle was what I considered to be the ecotherapy work, bringing people into nature for their healing and well-being. And I started working as an outdoor activity instructor, but really focused on people reflecting on their experience of being in the wild and how that was affecting them and benefiting them. And then from there, we set up the Ecotherapy Project with Plymouth NHS, where we work with people with severe and enduring mental health issues. And we were given a plot of land with a polytunnel, and we could just do whatever we wanted. We also had an area of woodland that we'd been given to manage. And we also worked with the Dartmoor National Park wardens to do conservation work and look after the wild ponies. So we had plenty to do. And also around that time, I started lecturing at Plymouth University on the clinical psychology doctorate. So I was teaching about the benefits of nature for recovery and as a complement or an alternative to placing people on medication. And because of the Ecotherapy Project, I was seeing how people who had been trapped within the system for over a decade, quite heavily medicated, but having no kind of quality of life at all, when they came out with us onto the land and onto the moor, they began to come alive, and they enjoyed being given responsibility. They enjoyed working with hand tools. They enjoyed the social aspects of it. Every week we'd have a fire and brew up a cup of tea on the fire, which they just loved. And it was so beneficial for them. We followed something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which looks at food, clothing, shelter, basic needs first. And that's what we did with the group. And we gradually formed a tribe. They became a tribe, looking after each other, building shelters in the woods to shelter us from rain, getting the fire going, cooking food and making drinks. And they loved it. And it's kind of progressed on from there, really. So the term Shinrin Yoku originated in the 1980s in Japan, and Shinrin Yoku walks were set up in response to a huge health problem in Japan due to people moving to the cities, and they wanted to offer them these health walks in the forest. Shinrin Yoku actually means forest bath or forest shower, which doesn't quite translate into our language. What it means is being completely immersed in a natural environment. And so when we take people out into the forest, we ask them to really surrender to being in touch with the forest. And we get people to lie down and feel the ground underneath them, to really connect with the earth, to lie in the leaves. And we also get people to not just stay on the paths, but to go off into the undergrowth so that they are completely immersed in the natural environment. And I think that's something that's also quite important when we design gardens, that people aren't cut off from those plants by having to remain on set paths, but that they can actually get in amongst the plants and really have an intimate connection with those plants.
Yes, that's very true. Keep off the grass is a is a big thing, isn't it, in ornamental gardens and ones that are open to the public. Yeah, it's definitely not encouraged to get in amongst the plants.
Yeah, we become spectators of
Yes.
the space rather than participants of the space. And one of the key aspects of this work that I teach is, as we enter a forest, we're perceiving the plants and animals in the forest, but we have to remember that they are also perceiving us, and they are also responding to us. So there's a reciprocity going on there, and we can really learn to understand and explore that sensitive relationship that we have with the natural world. Because after all, we came from it. We spent 7 million years developing in forest environments.
Yeah, that's something that's come up a lot actually in recent episodes, this perception that we are not nature and that we're separate to it and we're observing it rather than being in it.
Yes, it's just an illusion. I guess my personal introduction to the Shinrin Yoku work came about 6 years ago, and I was doing a residential training course at a college, and the course was called Nature as Healer, and we'd been sent out one evening to meditate on our own. And it was about this time of year, but it was warm and muggy with thunderstorms that were very dramatic. And as I went out, one of these thunderstorms came over, and it was raining very heavily. So I crept into a private garden in the rain in the evening, and I found shelter under a pine tree. And as I was sitting with my back against the trunk of the tree, meditating, I became so conscious of the intense smell of the pine tree. And I realized in the rain, the pine tree scent was intensified and that I was breathing it in. And I had one of those moments of revelation where I realized the essence of the tree was going inside me. And that just blew me away, actually. I just sat there thinking about that. As the tree was giving off its oils, I was breathing them in and they were inside me. And then it occurred to me that as I breathed out, the tree was probably breathing me in too. So we had this beautiful relationship, this communion, this reciprocity going on between us. And that was really the start of my journey into teaching Shinrin Yoku. And when I discovered the research and evidence from Japan and South Korea, it was everything that I needed that complemented all the work that I've been doing over the last 20 years. Because within the NHS, a lot of skeptics are saying, Stefan, where's your evidence base? Where's your evidence base for your work? It's all anecdotal. And here it was, finally. I had the research from Japan showing how being in nature benefits our health, both physiologically and psychologically.
You've got a lot of that research linked to from your website, haven't you? And I was having a look through it, and I was actually, although I do completely believe that there are beneficial effects, and I've seen the evidence produced from probably researchers more in the UK and the US, but actually the Japanese research is seemingly taking it to another level, even to the point where one of the things that I clicked on was about the benefits of smelling a fresh rose. So the evidence is there. So as you say, sometimes I wonder if there is a friction between the discipline of ecotherapy and the medical profession, but you do have all that research. Do you still find people question what you're doing?
No, not at all. The attitudes have changed over the last decade, and I find people are a lot more open now to embracing these concepts. And we've had mindfulness being brought into mainstream. We've had the concepts of green gym, social prescribing. Things are moving in this direction, and I work with people from social services, from the NHS, from education departments, from the national park, and people are really much more open to these concepts now. And we have the science and research to back up our arguments. The thing for me is that the science and research is really just the superficial. It's just the top layer of what we're doing. And actually, for me, the focus and the benefits of this work is at a spiritual level. As I'm sure many gardeners will know, being out in the garden is just so calming and relaxing. When I'm in a garden, it just puts me in touch with this feeling of awe that a lot of the research talks about.
And what does it actually involve, and is it suitable for everyone?
Yes, so a typical Shinrin Yoku walk would take place over maybe 2 hours, but you would hardly walk any distance at all. So you're walking very slowly, and by walking slowly, we begin to relax, we begin to calm down our physiology, and we begin to notice so much more that's there in nature. And in that experience of noticing what's in nature, we recalibrate our senses. We tune into the subtle, tiny aspects of nature, and that has a very powerful effect on our mental state and also on our physiology. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is really to do with a lot of the essential oils that are given off by plants naturally. All plants give off these volatile organic oils as part of their defense mechanisms. So when we breathe in these oils, they actually enhance our immune systems, which I find to be a complete miracle.
And are there any that aren't good for that? Has it been investigated if there are any plants, because as you say, they're a defense mechanism, they are there to ward off larger predators? Is there anything that you shouldn't be touching or smelling?
There hasn't been enough research done in this country looking at the flora of this country in that respect. And personally, I'm very attracted to poisonous plants. They seem to have a certain allure to them, and I love studying them. But obviously, we can go and be close to one of those plants and experience them without needing to touch them or pick their leaves, etc., which I definitely wouldn't advise. But certainly being in proximity to plants like aconite, for example, comes to mind. Such beautiful plants. So I would definitely say that Shinrin Yoku walks were suitable for anybody. And in certain areas of woodland, people who were, for example, in wheelchairs would be able to get out and still perform the same exercises that we do to help people to retune their senses to the natural environment. I've just been running a course this weekend, just finished yesterday, and one of the participants on the course was blind, and he participated fully in all of the exercises.
Brilliant. That's probably quite a nice link into the kind of courses that you offer at your centre. What could people come along and do if they were interested?
So there's a 2-day training course, which is a basic training course. And from my side of things, it's quite intense, although participants say it's incredibly relaxed. But the syllabus gives people an introduction to all the principles and practices of Shinrin Yoku. It's very experiential. So the first couple of hours, I talk about the science and research, but then we move more into philosophy, psychology, poetry, and then we move off into the woods, and then it's purely experiential. So we present a series of exercises that help to retune each of the senses. Because we're such a visually dominant society, our minds tend to rely on what we see. And what we see and what we perceive isn't necessarily the whole picture. So some of the exercises ask us to close our eyes and focus on the other senses, like hearing, like smell, like touch. And so we can begin to build up more of a kinesthetic or a synesthesia of aspects of the woodland or forest that we're in. We get more of a sense of the forest with our eyes closed than we do just by looking.
And is it just forests, or is it something that you could do in a more cultivated space?
Yes, a lot of the research, both in America, Finland, and in Japan, has looked at the use of all green spaces. So parks and gardens are described as being perfect locations for Shinrin Yoku walks because they stimulate all of the senses.
As a plant nut, I'm wondering whether if you were to build a garden for that purpose or to take on a piece of land, would it be better to use native plants, or, is it okay to have a mixture of garden plants and some wilder areas? I just wondered if any research had been done into that, really.
It's a really interesting question, Sarah. As far as I know, nothing has been done in relation to that. It would be a lovely project to do, actually, because you can incorporate a lot of the tactile or haptic qualities of plants. I'm thinking particularly of the lovely soft leaves of lady's mantle. So imagine exploring those with your eyes closed and then combining that with some of the scents of the plants and trees that we know have got intense healing properties. So in Japan, the research focused on what they call the 5 sacred trees of Japan, mostly hinoki and sugi, which are cedars or cypresses. There's no reason why, for example, we couldn't incorporate some of those trees into garden plantings so that we would get the scents and the benefits from those trees as well, mixed in with our own native plants.
Yeah, it would certainly be interesting to look into, as you say. So I guess you don't have to do it in a particularly structured way. You can just do it off your own volition. If you wanted people to get a taste of what it was all about and how they might benefit, if you could just say to people, do one thing, what would you recommend that they did?
Okay, so here's one of the exercises that we do on the course that I particularly like. Find somewhere to sit in a garden or green space and close your eyes and just focus on listening, and start from quite close in around your head. Imagine a set of concentric rings expanding out from your head out into infinity, and just listen to what's up close to you, and then let your hearing expand outwards so you begin to hear more and more different sounds as you allow your hearing to extend out as far as you can. How far away can you hear? And you begin to build up a sound map of everything that's around you. And once you've gone as far out as you can, bring your hearing all the way back in again until it's just a couple of inches away from your head. Or maybe you can hear what's going on inside you. Then do the same thing again. Allow your hearing to expand outwards, but this time hear everything all at once as a symphony of sounds. We may get natural sounds, we may get man-made sounds, but it all mixes in together to create this wonderful 360-degree symphony, this sound bath.
I can see why you say it's a kind of synesthesia type experience, because it's experience in the world, not just in a kind of flat way. It's about building that multi-dimensional picture up inside your head and allowing yourself to do that. It sounds incredible. If people did want to find out more, as I say, your website's a fantastic resource. where could they go? If you could just tell us the name of your website, and then if there's anything else or anywhere else people can go and explore more, that would be great.
Yes, certainly. The website is called Nature and Therapy UK, and you can find us there. And there are resources on the website with links to books and the science articles. There's a lovely book that's been written by a man called Dr. King Lee. That's King spelt with a Q, Q-I-N-G, Dr. King Lee, L-I. And he's written a book on Shinrin Yoku, which gives a basic introduction to it. And there's also some interesting articles that have been created by Yorkshire Tea, of all people.
Okay.
They've got articles which you can access through the Guardian newspaper website. So I think about once every month they put up a new article about the health benefits of being in nature.
Wow. Unexpected.
So that's a starter.
Yeah.
Yes.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Presumably you have to sit down with your cup of Yorkshire tea at the same time, but brilliant.
Yes. I think they're indicating that they are, as a company, they're committed to planting more trees.
Right. Okay. Well, that's good. Hat off to them. Brilliant.
Yes.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you to Stefan as well for his time. There's lots more information about him in the show notes, but if you did want to check out his website, it's natureandtherapy.co.uk. So thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next Tuesday. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website www.rootsandall.co.uk, where you'll also find my blog and a sign-up form for the newsletter, which gives you a weekly roundup of content, plus the inside scoop on things like upcoming guests. Or you can subscribe wherever you normally get your podcasts. Email me with comments and feedback at podcast@rootsandall.co.uk. Follow me on Twitter, Roots and All, Facebook, Roots and All UK, and Instagram, Roots and All Pod. But please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support my work, because if you like what I do, please help me to continue doing it. Even if you make a one-off donation of £1, trust me, it all helps, and I will be immensely grateful. So please go to Patreon and search for Roots and All.